All set? Okay. Good afternoon. The Committee on Supply will now be called to order, and I will now recognize the honourable member, the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to say good afternoon to the Minister and to her staff. Familiar faces, and I was just joking with them. I've seen them hanging around the halls for the last 3 days, so finally we get a chance to speak with them, and I know that they will be providing the Minister with support. And I've been in her seat there. I know how important that staff support is, and I do also understand, and I don't expect the Minister to have all of the answers when I ask the question, but I expect staff will find those for her and be able to help her out. So having said that, I will make a few comments about my reaction to the speech from the throne, if we could start there. And I did make these when I responded, and I will make them again. The speech from the throne obviously picks the highlights that the government of the day is bringing in, and does a little bit of an overview, I guess, of what we and Nova Scotians can expect when the budget comes down. And you know, in this province, when we look at the departments that are consume most of the taxpayers' dollars, the biggest departments and the highly funded departments, we look at health and we look at education, community services, and others. And so when I listened to the speech from the throne, and when I read the contents of the speech from the throne, I was quite surprised, disappointed with the lack of attention to education in public schools. In fact, as I went through that and as I listened, I noted that there were two statements that referred to programs in public education, public schools, and they did both refer to trades programs or programs in our high school that have more of a focus on skills training. And my disappointment was that there was not a full section dedicated to education, both assistance to universities and public education. And I was nervous about that, and I was afraid that I might be reading something into that was not there. And I thought by omission it was sending a message that education may not be a priority for this government. And I know I've heard the Minister make a commitment to the importance of education, and I've also heard the Premier recognize and identify education. And I would suggest that there's no member in this House who doesn't recognize the importance of education. And we also recognize that it covers a variety of areas and ages, from early childhood through public schools, through post-secondary, and on to adult learning. And so to think that the scope of education is that broad, and to think that there were two lines in the throne speech that spoke to public schools education, I think there were others along with me who felt it was a serious omission. And so perhaps I can start with a question that I know the Minister will be able to answer without perhaps seeking advice from her staff, is was this an omission?
Here though, because the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that the throne speech represented some new direction that our government plans to take, and I think actually the recognition that public education and post-secondary education in this province have a very strong foundation, and this government wants to continue doing more of the same, could actually be taken by the honourable member as a compliment to her government, who was in charge the last 10 years and invested quite heavily in public education as well as post-secondary. And I think we're all grateful for that $123 million investment into the community college system a number of years ago. I think actions speak louder than words, and the fact that we as a government are investing over almost $1.4 billion in public education and post-secondary education in this province attests to the significance that we hold education. And certainly we're very proud to continue to talk about our province as a learning province. And the work of both the Department of Education and the Department of Labour and Workforce Development, I think, is going to be very much a significant part of the solution to some of the economic and other problems that we're facing in this province. So to answer your question, education is very much valued, and we certainly will be investing money as it becomes available through bringing back our back to balance initiatives and making sure that we're working from a strong financial and fiscal foundation as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to remind all members and all people visiting in the gallery that electronic devices are to be put on silent and ringers off at all times. So I would like to make sure that everybody notices that. And now I will recognize the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the thank you to the minister for her response. It doesn't ease my mind a whole lot, because I believe that the minister recognizes and has articulated the value of education. But to say that the throne speech was setting a new direction, and to have public education not be identified as part of that new direction is still disconcerting. So my question to the minister would be, what new direction in public education should we anticipate?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are a couple of initiatives that were mentioned in the throne speech. I believe the commitment to expand the community college system by 250 seats, and in the budget we've set aside $2 million to achieve that. And those seats will be recognizing demand not only in terms of what students are looking for, but also employers, and also matching that with the labour market demands that this province will see in the future. And those seats will be available from one end of the province to the other. Another initiative in the budget that I believe was perhaps referenced in the throne speech as well is our new Innovation and Growth Fund. And we're setting aside $2 million to enhance the concept of community schools. And that all those details haven't been worked out, but it appears that it will be mostly in enhancing the service delivery capacity of school facilities to better meet the broad needs of families and residents in their communities. And so, for example, I think we're looking at expanding the Schools Plus program to more boards and to more schools. And this certainly will be an asset, be a very efficient and effective use of taxpayers' dollars in the delivery of programming and services. So those are just two of the areas that we plan to move forward on. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And perhaps I need to make myself clear. I'm talking about public school programs. I'm not talking about post-secondary or assistance to universities. So the response about the community college seats is not part of public schools program. So I guess my question would be, I will repeat it, what direction in public schools programs can we expect to see? Change, new direction, to use your words, new direction.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are a number of initiatives being discussed at education, and as the honourable member well knows, the Department of Education and the government doesn't work alone in terms of public education. There are significant education partners that have a lot of say and need to be involved in the process. Several of those partners have reinforced the concept that we need to make sure that the curriculum and the programming in public education is as modern and matches the needs of graduating students today. So even though we haven't worked out again all the details, I think it's fair to say that we're seriously looking at a major review of a curriculum and programming to make sure it meets the needs of students in the 21st century. And we're also, in terms of the response of the department to several of the studies that were actually initiated by the former government, we're trying to look at what can be done to better engage students in public education and to also meet the special needs of sort of subpopulations like African Nova Scotians and children with special needs. So it's a broad approach that we're taking, but we want to do more. We want to make sure that the taxpayers' dollars are invested and that we're using each one as strategically and smartly as possible. So we want to get better value for our money, and we want to make sure that we're meeting the current and future needs of each and every student in our school system. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Minister, and through the Chair. The reference that was made to the education partners is one, of course, that the whole life in education, I'm quite familiar with all of those partners and the roles they play and how they provide a good pulse on what's going on in the communities and have some very good ideas as to what might be included in new direction. But we're talking about funding for public schools education, and we're not talking about sense of cooperation in planning. And so I'm not prepared to accept the answer that the education partners are contributing to the allocation of funding. I believe as part of the consultation process, they have been and will be an important voice that needs to be heard. Perhaps the most recent expression of interest and offering of advice from the education partners came during the Back to Balance road show by the Minister of Finance. And Nova Scotia School Boards Association were there, and their message of Save Grade 2 was very loud and clear. The School Boards Association, the Nova Scotia Teachers Union, the School Administrators Association, Home and Schools, School Advisory Councils, all of those partners come together with a very strong voice in helping the Department of Education understand the needs within the public schools. And the message that they were delivering through the NSSBA and through the Save Grade 2 was that in order to maintain existing programs in our public schools, they had done the math and they determined that they would be, school boards would be needing 3.6, I believe it was, % increase. And so to say on the one hand that, you know, we value the voice of the education partners, I think is important to acknowledge. However, to suggest that, A, they might be responsible for some of the funding is not accurate. And secondly, to say that they were heard, I don't think is reflected in the decisions that were made by this government. So I guess we can perhaps go there and say, what part of the message that the education partners through the NSSBA shared around the province, what part of the message, what part of the 3.6 was not heard by this government?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased the honourable members raised the issue of the Save Grade 2 campaign. And as I mentioned, I believe in answering one of the questions on Friday, many people have stopped me and asked me, what does Save Grade 2 mean? And I was explaining to them that cutting a grade level in school is unthinkable, and I think the education partners were trying to get across the message that not funding public education adequately would be unthinkable as well. And I find it a little ironic because I was actually involved in some of the early consultations by the Nova Scotia School Boards Association in terms of their what they should do to raise the profile in interest of the general public for education. And some of you may realize that I'm an honorary life member of the Nova Scotia School Boards Association, and I think I have the unique advantage being the Minister of Education because, you know, I was the parent and now the grandparent of children in the school system. I was a teacher and so belonged to the NSTU for a couple of years. I was married to a teacher for 30 years. I served on a school board for 10 years. I was a member of the Home and School Association. So there aren't too many of the education partners, organizations that I have not been a member of. And I find this gives me a unique perspective on educational issues because, quite frankly, I'm trying to view those issues through all those different lenses. And if I can satisfy myself sometimes, then I think I'm satisfying most of the partners as well. The Save Grade 2 campaign suggested, based on the information that they had, that a certain amount of money, $36 million, would be necessary to adequately fund public education. Now, there's some disagreement over what was in that amount and what wasn't, but for the most part, the $20 million additional funding that we put into, we gave to the school boards met pretty much all the needs. What has happened, though, is that in addition to that, government has asked every department to pass along a 1% efficiency cut. And that's where that's translated into actually a 0.7% cut to funding to school boards because they also get municipal education funding as well. And that's the reduction that many of the boards are struggling to meet over the next several months. The day after the budget speech here in the chamber, senior officials met with the superintendents, the chairs of the school boards, and their chief financial officers, and they received their profile sheets, and that met a commitment to get that information out to them in a very timely fashion. And I also had the chance to address them briefly that day. They have known since our government went in, between the media and what they've heard officially from department officials in a regular, ongoing fashion. They understand the fiscal reality of this province. And I don't think at any time they felt that they were going to escape their share of trying to help this province get back to balance. And so when I went around the province last summer and met with each and every board in their home administration office, we had some frank discussions because even by then we knew that there was a looming deficit, a structural deficit in this province. And so we talked about ways that they could be creative and use money, the funding that they do get, as effectively as possible. So they've been thinking and working on this for a number of months. And one thing, this 0.7% efficiency reduction, the approach we've taken to that is not to force it on school boards. We've given them several months to work through, make sure that what they do in their area matches their uniqueness and their needs. You know, as I've brought up in this House before, you get very unusual circumstances. So if you look at the Strait Regional School Board, that board covers 20% of the geography of Nova Scotia with 6% of the student population. And that creates very significant challenges for that board, which would be very different from one of the other boards in the province. So the boards need to have some flexibility in matching the available revenue to their programming, to their transportation needs, and to the facility structure that they have throughout their school board. They're all professionals. They understand the economic reality. They've been given significant new money to help ease the transition, and every indication is that the boards and senior officials are going to be able to cooperate with us, and we'll work together to make sure that there's as minimal impact, negative impact on students in the classroom as possible. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I could follow up with a specific question based on what you've just shared with me. Boards, if I'm clear on this, boards have been asked to do this efficiency reduction, and they will determine where they can find the savings. My question is, if that is in fact true, what is the timeline that boards have been given to identify those efficiencies?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the honourable member well knows from both her distinguished career in education and her time as Minister of Education, the boards usually make their budget decisions within a month and a half or so after the provincial budget comes down. And so for most of them, as I understand it, they're either in discussion at their committee stage or at the board level in terms of matching the available funding to their program and transportation and other student needs.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you. I'm not sure I got an answer. I know the process, but I'm also hearing from boards who say they are not able to do that. So my question to the minister would be, through you, what is the timeline that boards have been given to identify those efficiencies?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, the Department of Education works very closely with the boards as they're going through their budget process. And if they identify pressures or particular challenges, then meetings are held to see if they can be resolved. So, for example, I know that senior officials are traveling to a board later this week to meet with them and to just clarify both the financial information that they have and what their options are, and to help them, mitigate any negative impacts of that reduction. I want to stress that there's $20 million additional dollars in funding to school boards in this province this year. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been through the process. I know how it works. I know what boards do And I also know that there are boards who may find it impossible to realize those savings. So my question to the minister would be, since I'm not getting an answer as to when a timeline might be for them to have identified those, if a board is not able to identify those, what is the department's response to the boards at that time?
My card.
Almost like question period.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, certainly, by regulation, boards are required to pass their budgets. I believe it's within 60 days of the provincial budget being passed. But the Department of Education is not set on punishing any board that perhaps hasn't met that deadline. We're more interested in working with them, better understanding the challenges that they're facing, and trying to work out some options so that they are able to live within the amount of money that's been allocated to them for this year. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that the minister indicated that senior officials would be meeting with boards, and I understand that that process has already started and it will continue. My question through you would be to the minister, have senior officials already met with the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board, and if not, when will they be?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This Thursday, the Deputy Minister and the Senior Executive Director of Corporate Services will be meeting with the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that because I know that board has come forward. They are expressing major concern with the inadequacy of the funding, recognizing, according to what they're saying, is that the increase in funding will not even allow them to maintain the status quo. So I'm pleased to hear that senior officials will be meeting with that board, and I want to talk a little bit about the a comment that was made with respect to the uniqueness of boards. And you know, it is true that the pressures in different boards are different. The geography there is different. The transportation costs are different, and there are some unique challenges that exist in one board and not in another. We have some boards that have some very rural schools, and we know the challenges and the additional costs to deliver programs to those rural communities and to those rural schools. We also know that the HOG formula was designed to address some of those unique challenges. So my question to the minister is this: how does the HOG formula now respond to the individual challenges of boards?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify an earlier answer. Department officials are meeting with the board chair and the superintendent, not the full board, and I may have misled you by saying the board. Yes, in terms of the HOG formula, as the honourable member well knows, there are some cushions in there to make the transition in terms of declining enrollment a little easier for boards to react to. And so there's a 2% trigger. And when a board has over 2% enrollment decline, there is some supplementary funding available to that board. And I think you said the 23. And this coming year, that supplementary funding is going to be over $23 million to ease the transition as boards gradually make the reductions to reflect that. And certainly, I think it's about 3% of the student population overall, on average, the population base in Nova Scotia in terms of enrolled students in public education is going down. And, you know, I've been quoted before, but certainly by 2020, we anticipate that the student population in Nova Scotia is going to be the same as it was in 1910. So that's going to be a significant change that boards have been adapting to, and certainly the demographics, even with family-friendly policies in this province and doubling our immigration rate, we don't see that downward trend for student population is going to change. And there's also another sort of cushion in the HOG formula to help boards with a number of small schools. And so if there's a small school with an enrollment of 100 students or less, they get some supplementary funding as well. And currently, for example, Annapolis gets funding for 1 small school, Cape Breton for 3, Chignecto for 11, CSAP for 1, Halifax for 7, South Shore for 9, the Strait Board for 4, and Tri-County for 4. So overall, there are 40 small schools being funded out of that supplementary funding to the amount of $6 million. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the Minister for that breakdown of the detail, and perhaps I could get a copy of that from you at some time, those small schools that are, or the boards that are receiving the extra funding for small schools. I'd also, at this time, if I could, ask for a list of the boards that are receiving the additional 2% because of declining enrollments.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
I could just make a general statement, and then we will make sure that you get the details. But currently, all but 2 boards are eligible for the enrollment supplementary funding, and the 2 boards whose decrease is not over 2% yet are CSAP and the Halifax Regional Boards.
The Honourable Minister of the Progressive Conservative Party.
No, so that would be Leader. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could also get a copy of that, and it's obviously a bit alarming to me, and I'm sure it is to you, to recognize that the number of boards that are relying on that is on the increase, and if we're down to 2, then I guess that causes me to ask the next question. The provisions that exist within the HOG formula to do those 2 things that you've just identified, the extra funding for small schools and the declining enrollment percentage, are those 2 significant changes in the way we deliver funding to our school boards enough to cause a review of the HOG formula?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those 2 supplementary funding pools have actually been available from the beginning when the HOG formula was first implemented. And I guess I would suggest the fact that they're being used means that they're working well. And they only represent about 2.5% of the public education funding that goes to school boards. So it's a small figure in terms of those cushioning effects. And you know, obviously the boards who are not benefiting perhaps would like to see that money reallocated to some of the other areas in the formula where they actually get funded. But it's very difficult, I think, to come up with a formula that covers the uniqueness and the challenges of every single board. Certainly there was considerable consultation, as the honourable member would well know, when the HOG formula was first developed. And it seemed to meet most of the challenges and needs of school boards in that time. And, you know, certainly I've been asked if we'd reopen that and reallocate some of that money, and my answer has always been that until we have significant new money available for public education, there's no sense taking away from some boards in order to give to other boards. That, you know, we're trying to develop a fair and equitable public education system across this province. And there's a certain stability now because the formula is well known, well understood. The impacts, we've had experience with the impacts, and I just don't see the sense of stirring the pot unnecessarily, causing a lot of disruption when we really don't have a lot of extra or new money to put into that particular funding pool. Down the road, certainly, but we keep a close eye on it. The boards are very upfront in terms of how they're dealing with the allocations that they have, and we'll work very closely with them. And certainly, you know, if any part of the funding formula or any board is struggling, they know that they can sit down with department officials and try to work through any other possible options. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not surprised that people have been asking the Minister about a review of the hog formula. That happened quite regularly for the 3 previous years, and I'm not surprised. However, with the increase in the number of boards that are taking advantage of the 2%, and with the statement of the Minister that we are continuing on a decline in the number of students in our schools, that prompted my question: is it now time to do a review? And I would like to say to the Minister that a review does not necessarily mean a change. And sometimes when you begin the process of a review, you may, at the end of that review, have confirmation that the formula that you currently have is the right one. But sometimes going through that process helps answer the questions that have been asked by those people out in the communities and in the public who constantly ask the question. And so a review to confirm, if that's what the results would show, that this is the appropriate formula, may be something that the Minister would want to consider. I'd like to, if I could, Mr. Chair, just switch gears a little bit with respect to public school programming. And I'd like to speak to the Minister and ask some questions about targeted funding. And in particular, and I'll let your staff get the right page there because I think they know the question. The targeted funding, are there more categories of targeted funding now than there would have been 2 years ago?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The target funding part of the formula has actually changed very little over the last number of years. I believe probably about 15% of funding that goes to school boards for public education is targeted. And I mean, obviously, most of the funding covers salaries for educators and support staff. Certainly, if there's any curriculum changes, sometimes money is targeted or dedicated to that. I believe, for example, Safe Schools, there was some money set aside to ensure that boards could do that. And some boards, I think generally, don't like target money as much because it doesn't give them as much flexibility in terms of dealing with the challenges that they have within their area. But there is, as you well know, a value to having targeted money. It protects certain aspects like public or special education, for example, that the province and boards feel are very important. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had the debate and the discussion with boards about the value in targeted dollars, and I maintain, and I'm sure the minister does as well, that if there are provincial programs that we want to make sure are provided and made available in our schools, sometimes we need to target the dollars to make sure that the boards have the funding they need to deliver that. My question is this specifically: is money for textbooks targeted?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Taking that category of textbooks, I'm sure the honourable member remembers, because it was part of her government's budget last year, there was a one-year deferment for textbook funding and educational resources, and that took it down from $8 million to $4 million. But, you know, there was a promise made to the school boards by the former government, and we've certainly honoured it. We've increased the textbook allocation back up to $8 million. What you may be leading to, and perhaps I'll answer it now, is the fact that even though we've told the boards that to give them a little bit of flexibility to deal with this 0.7% efficiency reduction, they have to spend 75% of that amount on textbook and educational resources. But if they need to, in order to balance out the needs in the other part of their budget, if they need to, they can access the remaining 25% after discussions with department officials. So we've tried, even though most of it is targeted, we've given them a little bit of flexibility, because some of them actually have a number of educational resources, you know, in storage and ready to be used in the classroom. So depending on their particular situations, they may not have to use all of the money targeted for textbooks this year. So we've given them a little bit of flexibility there to help them meet some of their other budget pressures. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I certainly was concerned about flexibility with the use of textbook dollars and the decision that boards can now make to redirect some of those dollars for other needs. And obviously I have a concern about that because even I know you're only talking about 25% of their allocation that can be redirected or that they can have some flexibility. But my concern is the whole issue of textbooks, and we could spend a day talking about textbook allocation. There are lots of sides to that argument, but I appreciate the information, and I'll be interested to see how many boards, and I will probably be asking the question sometime later, how many boards will have to take some of their textbook dollars in order to cover other costs. And I know you can't answer that question now, but I would be interested, and I'm sure you'll be interested, and that's something that will need to be monitored at the department level. I want to ask a quick question about, because I think my time is running short, a question about the tuition reduction strategy that was implemented by our government with respect to bringing tuition in our universities to the national average. And as you would recall, having been in opposition at the time and knew the concerns that students were raising about tuition, and the fact that I was quite proud to be part of the government that introduced that strategy and laid out a plan that would bring the university tuition in our province to the national average by the year 2010. So we are in the last year of that strategy. So I guess my question through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister would be, where are we with that reduction strategy as we now are in the year 2010?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, certainly, I just want to start this part of my answer by saying that we expect to meet that target of being at the national average by the end of the year. And as you would well understand, it's a moving target because the situation is changing in all the other provinces, so it's not just a fixed amount. Currently, we're second, I believe, after Ontario, and but we expect to see with the increases being provided in assistance, and I'll get into some of those details in a minute, that we expect to be in the middle of the pack by the end of the year. So if the honourable member wants to, I can give some detail on what's happening. We're really pleased that this coming year, we're going to be able to return $1,283 of the Nova Scotia beneficiary back to all students, and there's also going to be, for the first time, a reduction of $261 to Oda Province students. So this is something that student organizations have been asking for. They recognize that a significant number of post-secondary students come in to attend our universities from outside Nova Scotia, and so this year we're able to give them some benefits of that bursary as well. So also, as the member would well know, there's a continuum of supports in terms of student assistance, and it starts from freezing tuition to providing student assistance to providing support to them when they've graduated, and we also have on the other end of things our retention rebate, where I think it's $7,500 for community college graduates, and it's up to $15,000, I think, for university graduates. So knowing that students have different needs, both in terms of their ability to access a post-secondary education, in terms of the supplementary support they need during that process, and their student debt when they graduate, we've tried to provide that continuum of supports financially all the way through. And I do have to give credit to the former government. Certainly, most of those were initiatives under at their call, and I think we've, and especially with the MOU to the universities, that was a way to freeze university tuition, and I would say that most people are quite satisfied with the reductions and the assistance that's provided. So thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm pleased to hear that the Minister has acknowledged that we are in the last year of that and the benefits that provides. It's also it's important to note, and we did at the time when we introduced that it was a bit of a moving target, and the projections for the increase in tuition at the national average became part of the deliberations and part of the formula that we used to see if we could bring the two closer together. Your comment about we're second to Ontario, perhaps you could clarify, does that mean that second to Ontario with respect to the cost of tuition? It does. Okay, so then my question would now be, recognizing that we are in the last year, recognizing that the plan that was put in place and the strategy is working, and recognizing also, however, that what's happening in other provinces will have an impact on that national average, my question would be, what plans are in place to make sure that we don't miss a beat, I guess, so to speak, and that when this strategy, the last year of this strategy unfolds, which it does in 2010, what is the go-forward plan to make sure that those concerns of university students that were identified and addressed through that strategy continue to become a priority, and we do not allow ourselves to get in a situation where we are not at the national average.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are several ways that we're recognizing that ongoing commitment. And certainly a couple of the increased benefits that I talked about in my previous answer in terms of the bursary will take effect this fall. So their impact will be felt throughout the coming academic year. And certainly the Memorandum of Understanding with the universities, that process there's a year left in the current MOU, and so that process will be starting up in the very near future, and I know will be certainly be a critical part of those deliberations. And we know, what is the trust?
Scotia Bursary Trust.
Yes, and we'll certainly have to be looking at the Nova Scotia Bursary Trust Fund and you know, what future additional commitments may be required there to keep us you know, at an average university tuition rate. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the messages that students gave us loud and clear when we were looking at working with them to try to bring the costs for university education something that would be within their means. And one of the messages that they gave us repeatedly was they believed that the support from government would be better, have a greater impact on their ability to go to university if those dollars were up front rather than after they graduate. And one of the things that we did as a government in order to get some of that bursary money there was to redirect some of those dollars. We did not have to put any new dollars in at that time, but we did redirect those dollars so that students were able to get the money up front, because what they were saying to us was a graduate tax credit at the end of a 4, 5, or 6-year program is useless if we don't have enough money to even get into the program. And so I would expect that students are probably feeling the same. I would be interested in knowing if, in fact, the voice of students is still saying we need our money up front, and how that translated into this government putting a lot of money into the graduate tax credit. The two just do not seem to come together. So perhaps the minister could explain how those two jive. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the honourable member is quite right. I've had several meetings with the two major student organizations, and their message loud and clear has been put everything into the upfront support. But I've tried to explain to them, as a government, we have to be looking at a broader range of interests, and certainly my government is committed to creating jobs and keeping skilled and educated, well-educated youth in our province. And we see the benefits and the purpose of the retention, the graduate retention rebate to do just that. It's not meant to make university more affordable or more accessible to young people. We have other programs that do that. And so we have this one initiative coming out of the Department of Finance that will encourage young people to stay in this province, to start jobs here, start their careers, raise families, and become productive and long-term citizens. And certainly, I would have to say that bringing out-of-province students into Nova Scotia to attend university is probably one of our greatest immigration initiatives, because approximately 22% of those out-of-province students remain and stay and become residents and workers in this province. So the graduate retention rebate is meant to assist all graduates from both secondary, post-secondary, whether it be university or community college, to take a strong look at and hopefully make a decision to stay and work and raise their families and live in Nova Scotia. So it's one of a number of programs, and it has a specific purpose, and it's not, as I said, on the affordability or accessibility side. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the, Honourable Leader, your time has expired for the Progressive Conservative Party. And now I will recognize the Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I'm wondering, has there been any additional funding for EPAs allotted in this budget?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly additional funding has been put into to the funding for school boards to cover the negotiated increases in wages. But, you know, how these school boards allocate the money that they have for different educational purposes in terms of professionals and the support workers is a local decision. So we've covered the increase in wages, and I have no idea whether there's going to be more, less, or the same number of educational aides. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
I do understand that each board decides to. We were just wondering if there was anything specific above and beyond that. The other night I was at a school board, Halifax Regional School Board meeting, and they have a long list of schools that are slated for builds and rebuilds, and that's not the ones that have been approved. This is a list that would be coming up after the ones that are in the process have been built. And I'm wondering, is there any thought to setting aside any money for that right now, or is that just going to be contingent on what happens in those budget years?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This budget actually includes $140 million for everything from new schools to A&As, which is additions and alterations, and also the purchase of new school buses. In addition, we've provided $11 million for energy refits for the school boards, and so that is, you know, considerable investment in capital and major renovations. Certainly, all boards, you know, continually plan ahead, and you know, they get considerable money for maintenance and sort of the minor repairs. So I'm not sure if any of the schools you saw might be listed for some of their internal allocations in terms of their maintenance funding. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
I believe it was last week we had the rankings of high schools come out by the Atlantic Institute for Market Studies, and we had sort of a wide range of scores and rankings. Does that concern you at all, that we have, schools that seem to be doing, really exceptionally well, and then others in the same sort of area that are not doing as well according to the ranking by Ames? And does the Department of Education sort of look at that? Do they pay any attention to what Ames says? And do you make any changes in the way things are run based on what Ames is saying?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to start my answer by suggesting that the government and the Department of Education always appreciate a healthy debate about public education. And certainly the annual release of the Ames rankings does that. The media cover it well. People often chat about it. But I have to be frank, I'm not sure. We don't base our decision-making on the Ames report because we don't believe in ranking of schools. We do significant provincial assessment, and boards and schools also have assessment processes, and it's that more scientific, evidence-based data that we use to make decisions to improve both our programming and also to indicate where the problem areas are and where some students might need additional support. That information is released in the Minister's annual report to parents, and that will be coming up fairly shortly. So it's that kind of assessment process that we have found through experience to be the best foundation for making informed decisions. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're always interested to hear how the chairman is going to announce the riding name. It's interesting that you mentioned evidence-based data, because from what we've been hearing from students groups like ANSA, which represents 85% of students across the province, they have great qualms with the government's planned to have to give a graduate tax credit, and in fact the evidence shows that these don't work. What I hear from parent after parent after student is that their kids cannot get jobs. There was a series that just ran in the Chronicle Herald by Roger Taylor where he talked about the fact that kids who have graduated from university keep coming to him and saying, I can't find a job, I can't get an entry-level position, I can't find work, and guess what, now I have to go to Alberta. So we can give them all the graduate tax credits we want, but on the flip side, if they can't find a job here in the first place, they're going to have to go to Alberta. And I can't tell you the number of parents I run into in my riding who I say, how is, Katie or whatever, and they say, Katie's gone to Alberta. She couldn't find a job around here. And I'm wondering, first of all, what is the evidence for that particular tax credit if we're going to talk about evidence-based programs, number one, and number two, why wouldn't we do something that would give kids a leg up and give them the experience, like, for example, instead of taking that money for the tax credit, we could have put it into a program to start to give kids jobs out of school, whether they were in the provincial government or whether they were with private business, but at least give them a chance to learn something.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there were several themes there, so let me start answering. If I miss something, you can let me know. As I've said many times on this floor, the graduate retention rebate is meant to encourage graduates from community college and universities to stay in the province, to start their careers here, to raise families, and to stay as long-time residents of Nova Scotia. And certainly, we have a significant number of those graduates already staying, and as I mentioned in an earlier answer about, we have significant number of out-of-province students who come particularly to our universities. And we're very fortunate because our universities, we call ourselves the university capital of Canada. And because of the number of universities and the fact that they're able to offer a particular niche experience or that is different from another university, it gives considerable choice to students both from within Nova Scotia and from outside Nova Scotia. And currently, about 22% of the students who come from out of province stay after graduation. And a significant number of our residents who graduate from university stay in the province. In fact, I believe it's something like 97% of students from Nova Scotia who attend community college work in the province. And so the retention, graduate retention rebate is meant to add to those numbers. It's meant to entice people who might be thinking of moving away to take a second look at staying here and raising their families. Now, if you're asking if we as a government and as a province can do a better job of matching some of the newly graduated students with job openings in this province, I'm sure, yes, we can do a better job, and we're trying to. Certainly through labour and workforce development, we're putting a lot of the demographic information, the information about what professions are available, where the openings are. We're putting more and more of that on our website to provide a clearinghouse of information for people who want to know what careers are opening up here and where the openings are throughout the province. So I think we can do better, and we are providing more and more information. We're also having parents as career coaches, which is a program in high school that's becoming very popular because a lot of parents and guardians, they recognize that their young people are coming to them to ask about potential careers in Nova Scotia, and they want to have the most up-to-date information on labour market studies and where certain training and other programs are provided in the province. And so they want to make sure that the information they give their young people is as reliable as possible. And this has been an excellent partnership with Labour and Workforce Development and the community college system and the public education system. So we're going to be doing more and more of that to make sure that young people have the information they need to make informed decisions. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do understand the theory behind the graduate tax credit. I just don't think that there's any scientific evidence that shows it actually works. So if we are in fact talking about evidence-based data, we haven't seen any of that, and in fact we've seen the exact opposite in other provinces where they did introduce something like this, and my party had it on our platform, not this past election, but the election before, because we thought it was a good idea. But then when we saw that the evidence showed that it doesn't work, we turfed that particular program. And the problem with having a tax credit, it doesn't work unless you're actually making some money. And the problem is that kids, not so much in community college, because those community college programs are directly linked towards providing openings that they can actually place. But when we're talking about universities, kids are coming out of university and they cannot get that first job. And that first job is so crucial to being able to stay here. If you don't have a job, you don't have a choice. And you can offer all the tax credits you want, but you have to have a job to be able to live. And we are not doing enough, in my view, in this area. And ANSA has been very vocal, as has Canadian Federation of Students. They don't think this is a good idea either. So I don't understand why we have gone down this road where, in fact, there is no evidence-based data that this works. It's kind of like the coyote cull, where we're going to start, killing all the coyotes because but there's no evidence that that works. And in fact, we're going to end up in a worse situation with the coyotes because they'll have more babies and they'll be stronger and all of that. But I'll move on to my question. So I did digress. That's true. That's true. Anyway, enough for my speech. I'm just wondering how much the university review by Tim O'Neill is going to cost.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you. While we're trying to find that information in terms of the cost of the review, I just want to add a couple of things to my my previous answer in view of some of the comments you made after I spoke. I think better matching students in their area of interest to jobs in their area of interest is a priority of everyone. And I think that's one of the reasons that the cooperative placements have been so popular, both at the secondary level and at the post-secondary level, because it gives a practical experience within the workplace, and it also accustoms the students to, the work ethic, the reality of that particular career choice, and it broadens their network of potential employers. And certainly, I think it's going a long ways towards creating both summer and part-time jobs and potentially placement after university and high school and community college. And in response to your concerns about the retention, the graduate retention rebate, sometimes you need to have some track record or experience with a particular program in your own province. And certainly, money that's not used in that rebate is not spent. It's not wasted. And if we don't get the take-up that that we're anticipating, then that money obviously can be reallocated somewhere else. So that's going to give us some of the basis of evidence and help us adjust any of those initiatives. Certainly, it's not money wasted. I want to make that point very, very clear. And we'll be tracking the uptake on it, and we'll see how it works. But our situation is quite different from other provinces, and we think it's worth testing it here to see if it might be one of a continuum of efforts to retain graduates here in Nova Scotia. We don't have the information in terms of the cost, but we will get that information and table it. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member from Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I take it from your last answer that you're committing to spending the money that isn't used to pay the graduate tax credit out on job training programs for new graduates?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that money that's not spent in the budget is obviously available for other uses. And if the numbers of graduates from university and community college, well, community college can hardly go up. I mean, I think it's at 97%. So obviously, so it may be a matter of looking at more that universities can do to make sure that the connections are made with the communities and potential career sectors out there, or it may be a matter of readjusting and looking at some other assistance initiatives to help people who graduate from the universities. But our government is open to change. We understand that the culture and the climate out there is changing. I don't literally mean the climate, but the factors impacting on young people making decisions about where they're going to work and take further study. It changes, and so we want to be flexible enough to adapt to the current realities. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member from Bedford Birch Cove.
As the mother of 3 children, you can probably tell that I'm I would really like it if there were lots of opportunities for our children here when they get out of university. In fact, I have one graduating in May, although she will be continuing studies. And I do appreciate the minister's comments around co-op. As she knows, I did a co-op degree in university, and I literally walked out of the university and into a job immediately, and I do think that made a difference. So I'm all in favor of that kind of thing. Earlier this week, we had or last week, I guess it was, I had asked you some questions around student loans and upfront funding for students involved in co-op programs. Could the minister update us on the result of the meeting that happened on Friday?
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe actually the meeting was on Thursday, and I hope I'm not telling tales out of school, but there was a lot of interest in possibly expanding student assistance, but it was recognized that there could be impact on the university programs, because every university has a different length of time, you know, for their co-op placements. And so it was decided before any final decisions were made, there'd be some consultation with the universities around that possibility. So no final decision has been made, but it's being reviewed very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member from Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate you updating us on the progress, and I'm sure as things proceed, we'll hear more about it. In terms of Tim O'Neill's review, will your government close or amalgamate universities if the review poses such an action?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I've said several times, I'm not going to prejudge the recommendations and the conclusions and options that Dr. O'Neill is going to provide. I believe his interim report's going to be ready in May, and then he's giving a final report to the Premier in June. And, you know, he's looking at, you know, a broad range of information and research and best practices around efficiencies and effectiveness. And the post-secondary unit within the Department of Education is providing the sort of research secretariat function for Dr. O'Neill, and it appears that he's doing a very broad-based, intensive background search on many of these issues. So we certainly await with much interest both his interim and his final report.
Thank you. The Honourable Member from Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do know that one of the student groups, ANSA, had a very short meeting with Tim O'Neill, and they were very pleased to have that meeting with him, and they've been able to make a written submission, but they haven't had sort of the long, broad consultation with him that university presidents have had, and I'm wondering if the minister would be so kind as to encourage Mr. O'Neill to have a good long meeting with them, because they are the ones who are most affected by what is going to happen here. Yes, people who are employed at universities will certainly be affected by what goes on, but these students, this is their future that we're talking about.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I appreciate the interest of the students' organizations to be more involved in this process, we've certainly left it up as a government to Dr. O'Neill to determine his approach, who he speaks to, and to what extent. So I wouldn't want to interfere with that. He's on a very tight timetable, and I know he's trying to meet with as many of the pertinent stakeholders as possible. And certainly, I'm sure if there were any issues that he had discussed with the students that he needed more information on, I have no doubt that he would go back and seek that information from them. And certainly, we're very pleased that student organizations were part of that consultation phase. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member from Bedford Birch Cove.
Sorry, allergies. Thank you, and with the greatest of respect, sometimes you don't know that you're missing information unless you actually have a conversation. Sometimes you think you have it all, and then you discover upon further examination. So I would just urge the minister to consider talking to Dr. O'Neill and mentioning that to him. To move on, will you renegotiate an MOU with the universities?
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we certainly anticipate that there will be a third memorandum of understanding, and we expect that process to start fairly soon, actually. Thank you.
The Honourable, the member from Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to make the point, I didn't do this at the beginning of my question time, that I will be sharing my time with the member for Kings West. So I'm just wondering, Minister, have you done anything to push for per-student funding from the federal government? And if not, will you?
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have followed up with other departments. As you can recognize, there are many aspects of the government who would be interested in this issue. You know, every department, from the Department of Finance to the Intergovernmental Affairs, Education, and a number of approaches have been made to the federal government over the years. Their position has not changed, and I'm sure that we will continue to press our point in terms of you know, equality. And you know, it's to the benefit of all Nova Scotians if we can get that formula changed. So we certainly will be pursuing that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Bedford Birch Cove.
I do know that the leader of the third party was asking you some questions around money that went to each of the boards, and so if it would be possible for me to get the amount of money that has gone to each board, or that will go to each board out of this budget, and I think you indicated that all except for 2 school boards will get supplemental funding because of the losses in student enrollment. And it just seems to me, and I'm just, that if everybody but 2 is getting it, then it seems to me the 2 that aren't getting it are sort of being penalized by not getting it. My other, and so if we could see the breakdown where it's going, who is getting the supplemental funding, and what the per student, the spending per student is on education, if we could get that information.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Board increasing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's probably more detail that we could table if you could identify what's missing after I give you some general answers. But in terms of the Annapolis School Board, we've been able to increase theirs by $1.173 million. Cape Breton's getting $2.7 million increase, Chignecto 2.7, CSAP 1.3, Halifax almost 7.5 million more, so Shore 2 million, Strait 1.3 million, and Tri-County 1 million. So did you want it by category as well?
Thank you. The honourable member from Bedford Birch Cove.
I'm not sure what you mean by category. I'm sorry.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Well, within the HOG formula, the boards get their allocation. A certain amount is for program funding, for special education, enrollment supplement, school support, student transportation, property services, class size supplement, governance, school management and support, regional board management, textbook credit allocation and formula adjustments. And then there's some other initiatives as well. So when they get their funding profile, which they did the day after the budget was tabled here in the House, they got the detailed information, the profile for each of those categories and their entitlements under the HOG funding formula. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Bedford Birch Cove.
Perhaps in the interest of time, if the minister could simply table that chart rather than going through each one, it would sort of move things along, because we could probably be here all day describing what each board got in which categories. But perhaps she could just speak to the issue of having CSAP and HRSB not getting the supplemental funding and what that will mean for those boards in the per student funding.
The Honourable, the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those two boards were the CSAP, the Acadian Board, and the Halifax Regional School Board. And that's because their enrollment decline was less than 2%. So from day one, in terms of the implementation of the new funding formula back in, I believe it was 2005, every board knew that if you were under 2% decline, you weren't eligible for the supplement, and if it was over 2%, you were. And I think about half the boards were eligible from day one, and a few more have, their decline has significantly increased, and so they're now eligible to the point that there's only two where the decline is not as heavy. You asked an earlier question about this per student funding, and it varies by board. I could just quickly run down if you're interested. Annapolis, it's 8,062. Cape Breton, 9,140. Chignecto, 8,363. CSAP is 10,240. Halifax is 7,473. South Shore, 9,326. The Strait, 10,193, and Tri-County is 9,039. So that's an average, if you average them all out, of $8,323. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps if we could have the minister table that chart as well, that would be most helpful. So I look at those numbers, and there's one that's glaringly smaller than the others, and I do realize that transportation is part of the equation, so that might be part of it. But also, we do know that HRSB has a large percentage of children, a larger percentage of children who have special needs. So I'm just I'm just wondering sort of what the justification is for Halifax Regional School Board being funded on a per student basis so very much less than the other boards.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a common phenomenon across Canada that in urban areas, because of the concentration of student population, you're able to have efficiencies that you wouldn't necessarily have when you're spread over a large geographical area with fewer numbers. And I've mentioned before the particular challenge of the Strait Regional School Board. Their school board covers 20% of the province in terms of geography, but only has about 6% of the student population. And that requires 97%, I believe, of their students to be bused. So their dynamics, the factors that are the cost pressures in their board would be very different from a relatively urban board like the Halifax Regional School Board. The board that gets the most money for all the different categories, that averages out to you know, the highest in terms of per student
CSAP at about 10,000.
cost is the CSAP at about 10,000, and that's because it covers a number of boards throughout the province. Most of the students have to be bused, and so their costs obviously are quite different and higher than many boards that can you know, have neighborhood schools, and a significant portion of their student population attend those neighborhood schools. So the challenges and uniqueness of each of the boards is reflected in their funding allocation from the province, and that's the reason for the variation. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Bedford Birch Cove.
It's interesting that the minister does mention the CSAP. Because in fact, what I've heard from parents who have their children enrolled is how terrific the programs are for children who have learning disabilities, etc. And in fact, you know, I'm aware of one cocktail party where people couldn't believe they were talking about going to school in the same city, and then they finally realized, no, one parent was talking about the great programs at her CSAP school for kids with learning disabilities versus the kids who were in the English program who did not seem to have the same kinds of programs as CSAP had for their kids who had learning challenges. And I'm not for a moment suggesting that we should be cutting anything that's going to CSAP. I applaud them for being able to offer those kinds of programs. I'm wondering what I have heard a lot of since I was elected was I have heard from a lot of parents who are deeply distressed by what they feel is a lack of consistent help from the school board for their children who have learning disabilities, and in some cases their children just simply aren't eligible for TSB because they may need a program assistant, they may be nonverbal, that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, at what point are we going to be directing more money to help these students achieve their full potential?
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, we invest considerable money into to public education in all of the school boards. In this upcoming budget, almost $126 million is being invested into to special education. And I can't speak to the specifics of you know, parent satisfaction with a CSAP school versus parent satisfaction with, you know, a school in the English school board. But what I can say is that the department is trying to provide more support to school boards in terms of learning disabilities. Within the last year or so, a consultant has been hired who has a lot of expertise in learning disabilities, and that person is tasked with working very directly with all the school boards to make sure that the money is well invested in a continuum of supports within all schools. And certainly there's a special education advisory committee to the minister and to the department that is continually looking at ways of improving those supports. It's a serious issue. You just need to have a child with special needs to understand the impact on the child and the family and extended network. And we just want to make sure that every child in Nova Scotia has the best possible chance of achieving their full potential. So that's our challenge. Again, are we doing enough? Probably not, but we're certainly trying to set aside as much money as possible for all those supports. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Bedford Birch Cove.
I'm wondering if the minister could outline how much funding has been allocated to the Options and Opportunities program. Is the program still being expanded this year? And I'm wondering, do we have a list of the schools where it is being expanded to at this point?
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This year we have over $400,000 of additional money set aside for options and opportunities. And I have to say that this isn't a large expansion, but what it is, it's to meet the commitment. So if it was in grade 11 last year, then it's to enable those students to continue on in grade 12. So it's to extend the programming in schools where it's already started. Currently, we have about over 1,600 students enrolled, and that's quadrupled since its introduction. I believe the member may know already that graduates of O2 are guaranteed admission to the Nova Scotia Community College if that's the post-secondary route they want to take. We have O2 in 46 schools across the province, and so we're very excited. It's working well. I met a number of the students and teachers and parents and future employers at a panel and a celebration of the O2 program at Prince Andrew last month. And I was just so struck by the enthusiasm of the young people. One of them is going on to university, and he's been working in a lab with fisheries. I think it's Ocean and Fisheries Canada, and as a result has a summer job because of his O2 placement. And you know, I wouldn't be surprised down the road to see him come back and work in that lab someday. But it's certainly been a great connection. They're learning a lot, and I know you fully appreciate the value of that program. So we're expanding it as money allows, but we're not leaving students hanging out there. If they started it, we're continuing on for the next year until they graduate from high school. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Bedford Birch Cove.
And this will probably be my last question, unless I need a clarification on the answer. But I'm just wondering what progress has been made to expand the Early Development Initiative, and are there any plans or funds for expansion in this budget?
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wonder if the member could elaborate on, is this the early childhood development? If you could just give a little more information about what program you're discussing. Thank you.
The Honourable member from Bedford Birch Cove.
Does that come under community services? You're going to tell me, right? So, all right, we'll just leave that alone. And now I will hand things over to my colleague from Kings West.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Kings West.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to my colleague for sharing your time. And pleased to have this opportunity, Minister, along with your staff, to ask a few questions. Education, of course, is never too far from my mind. It's been a big part of my life and professional commitment, and my interest and passion remains very high. One of the programs that the previous government brought into place in an experimental, in a pilot manner, was the pre-primary early education program at 19 sites across the province. And the 3-year program revealed to Nova Scotians, revealed to parents and communities, and of course children, tremendous value in early education. And there were many lessons learned. There were many very positive deductions made from those schools. I'm wondering if you have any plan to, package, I guess, those good things, those good practices, and work them into either, a daycare setting, or offer them in a manner to school boards that could potentially pick up on them with some type of community partnerships to have them realized for the future benefit of our children.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a very comprehensive question because there's so much going on. I just want to start by saying that the department fully recognizes the value of early learning and early intervention. And certainly the research that is becoming much better known indicates that significant developmental and learning happens before the age of 3. And so the Education Department shares the interest and responsibility for early learning with a couple of other departments, specifically Department of Community Services and Health Promotion and Protection. And while anything that we can do to improve readiness and ability of children to enter and learn in elementary school is of interest to education, we don't have primary responsibility for some of those initiatives. However, we do fund through our African Canadian Services Division a program called 4+ in two schools in the province, and you may be aware that that 2 school boards, the Halifax Regional Board and the Strait Regional Board, continue to fund out of their funding. They use provincial and municipal money for this, but there's no direct provincial funding going into it for early years programming in like 1 year prior to school entry. Probably the most direct involvement of the Department of Education is in the Schools Plus initiative, and we have this is a way to sort of coordinate a number of services and programs of various levels of government and community agencies and organizations within the elementary school, or sometimes it's a family of school. I believe in Amherst, it's the Amherst High School and its whole family of feeder schools. And this is a way to better use public funding in terms of collaborating across agencies and across levels of government to better support young students and their families. So that's just sort of a brief menu of some of the initiatives, but we certainly recognize the importance. I believe one of the research studies in North America suggests that for every dollar invested in early learning and childcare, you save $17 on the other end because it's not needed for remedial or corrections or supports. You're dealing with conditions and maximizing the potential of young people early on. And certainly, in this day and age where we have to be so careful and cautious and spend money strategically, I think that's an important ratio that we have to remember. So, we certainly want to improve on what we're able to do for early learning in this province, and the Department of Education will certainly play a role in that. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And indeed, Minister, that sounds like that last statement an endorsement of trying to do more in the early childhood sector. I don't have a lot of time, so I just wanted to hit a few other areas. And the minister talked about the HOG formula, which has become the adopted formula for the province to provide the major framework for funding to our school boards. One of the areas that I've had presented to me on many occasions, both by maybe in less times by the Halifax board, but certainly every year consistently, starting with Dr. Jim Gunn with the Annapolis Valley board. And they've had successive years since the inaugural year of the HOG formula. They have been below the 2% threshold. So being below the 2% threshold, they, and some years of, 1.3, 1.5% loss of students, they have this accumulated, deficit in many ways for being funded. And in two parts. Number one, Minister, I'm wondering if you have looked at, or the department will be looking at, a way of saying the number 1, 2 least funded boards in the province because of the hog formula will get some attention. And secondly, do you think that perhaps the time has come that now we need to review both the merits and the deficiencies of the hog formula and eventually make some necessary changes?
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure we could spend hours discussing the hog formula, but it's only been in operation for 5 years, and it seems to be working as it should. So, for example, the Annapolis Regional School Board initially was not eligible for the supplement for around the decline in enrollment, but they currently are. Their enrollment decline is about 2.9%. That's over 2%, so that's triggered their inclusion. So they're actually getting this coming year $1.2 million in benefits because of they're now eligible for the supplement for declining enrollment. And you might be interested to know that how many?
What's their enrollment number? 437 students this year. It was 377 last year.
Yes. So their decline is actually continuing to go down. It's up over last year, so they'll continue to be eligible, as I just mentioned, and I think it's fair to say that any of the boards who were not eligible for certain supplements. We're somewhat critical of those supplements, but now that more of them are eligible, they see the value in having those supplements, and they're much easier about it. So, for example, there's only 2 boards who are not eligible for the supplement with declining enrollment, and that's the CSAP and the Halifax Regional Board. So all the others are now getting money under that, and it's meant to cushion the impact of severe decline in enrollment. And as we know, and certainly you as a professional who's retired from education would appreciate, it's very difficult to, you just can't have a certain number of students. They go to school where they live, and the boards have to deal with those numbers. So, you might have 16 in a class, you might have 24 in a class. And so if you look at the average student costs, or the amount of money that they're getting, that's going to change just by the efficiencies that a board can make depending on how many students live in that population around that particular school. So you well know and understand how sometimes these statistics look obvious, but they're not. They're very complex, and the boards are doing their best to work within a number of different parameters around funding. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Kings West has approximately 8 minutes left.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And while I was aware that they had 1 year out of 5 in which they are able to benefit from this supplement within the hog formula, which in this case is a very good thing. However, there have been the challenges for at least four of those years, but which brings into focus the fact of declining enrollment and the impact on small schools in particular. And we know that this is going to continue to be a fact of life in Nova Scotia. And I know how the minister, through her party in the past, has rallied around the preservation of small community schools. And I wonder, Minister, if you could give me and give us in the House the short version of your view, your philosophy around the value of small community schools.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm not sure how long the honourable member has for me to respond to that. I have looked at this issue from possibly every lens possible. As a board member and as a parent in a community, I've been involved in initiatives that have closed schools, kept schools open. It's probably the most emotional issue I think that any educator or any parent can be involved in around education. And I think my short answer would say that it depends on the situation. When a small school is the last sort of public building in a community, I think the arguments and the factors that one is looking at may be quite different than if it's one of several or more than one public building in a community. And certainly I think through our the money that we've set aside as a government in our innovation fund, we want to support public infrastructure in communities. Now, whether that building remains a school or whether it becomes a public delivery mechanism for public services and services that are based in the community may be another part of the equation. Every situation is unique, and I think that's why we have developed a very comprehensive provincial school review policy. And one of the changes in the policy is to recognize and to value the input from communities, but it's also to recognize that there are some community values and factors that need to be looked at, not just educational ones when reviewing school buildings. So as you well know, it's a very complex issue. No two situations are the same. And I think that's why we've tried to put in place a structure and a process that enables all that information to be shared with the public, that they have full involvement in making sure that the board has the most up-to-date information and understands the impacts that those decisions will make. And, hopefully reasonable people will make reasonable decisions in the best interests of both the youth and the community. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and possibly my last question here. So, two parts around teacher training. We know that a report was carried out on teacher education in the province. I'm wondering where some of those recommendations are, where that report is in terms of the Department of Education. And one of the areas that I sometimes will hear from school principals and staff is that teachers coming in from the 4 different universities that educate our teachers is that there are considered differences around classroom management, and that's obviously in good measure as to the emphasis that is placed on that area in teacher training. And I'm wondering if the minister could provide a comment on the establishment, perhaps, of common requirements for our teachers going into classrooms in the future.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you. There are a number of initiatives happening at different levels. Certainly in terms of the recommendations of that earlier study, we're currently in the process of setting up the advisory board for teacher training, so that is ongoing. And also throughout Atlantic Canada, there's a mechanism for the ministers and the deputies to work together on teacher training issues. And currently there are meetings going on with the deans of education at the various universities that provide education training, and they'll be looking at some of those issues. And of course, the other side of it is the professional development, because most of our teachers are currently in the system, and we want to make sure that they have all the learning opportunities possible. So thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Kings West.
Okay, just with just a short time remaining, I was wanting also to know the minister's view on the autonomy that school boards should or shouldn't have in terms of developing some local curriculum initiatives.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Certainly, I believe there's a role for school boards in curriculum development, and any of the provincial initiatives that happens through the Department of Education always involves educators. And it's never done in isolation from what's happening in the classroom and what needs to happen. So that consultation with educators, our education partners, especially the school boards, is ongoing. And I mentioned in an earlier answer that there seems to be agreement among the education partners that taking a look, reviewing in a general sense the curriculum to make sure it's relevant and modern and meets the needs of the students in the 21st century is something that we're going to consider very seriously. Certainly, there are models within the province. CSAP actually do their own curriculum development with support from the Department of Education, and we'll be quite interested to evaluate that and see the outcomes. There are a number of opportunities for local boards and educators to get involved with curriculum development, and certainly we encourage that because we need to have input from all those groups in order to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member's time has now expired. The chair will now recognize the honourable member from Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the minister and her staff for being here again tonight. Just want to take the minister back to a Friday evening. The minister recalled on Friday evening, and I understand the minister cannot talk about a specific case or a specific issue with people's names, and I understand that, but I guess I just want to go back to the issue that's been brought to my attention is around the assessments for those who have either learning disabilities or those with a couple of the disorders I mentioned on Friday evening, ODD or ADHD. What I'm being told is that some of these assessments are taking 2 years or longer, and I wonder if the minister can tell me if these assessments are something that she and her department are looking at, if there's anything in the budget this year that will help speed up those assessments. Sure, the minister will agree that when you have a child that's in need of further additional help and resources, when they're unable to have the assessment done, it's a lot of time for them that they're waiting and waiting and waiting, and they don't see any kind of hope in regards to that additional resource being provided. So I wonder if the minister can tell me if the assessment's an issue she's looking at, and if in fact this budget has anything in it for to help parents of the children I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
It's an issue that we're constantly having consultations with boards about, and as you mentioned, the ratios have been improving over the years.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is, of course, of interest to the department, and the ratios with some of the specialists have been improving year after year. We've been putting more money each, I think, of the last 10 years. Certainly a lot of this has evolved and developed under under the former government, and you know, we give them credit for improvements that have been made. So I must say, as minister, I've certainly, you know, walked into an inherited situation, both fiscally and in terms of supports for children with special needs. So you know, whether some boards invest the $20 million additional dollars that have been put into public education in some of these areas, I'm not sure. Several boards spend considerably more than the dedicated funding for special education on those needs, and you know, we'll work with boards to encourage them to